The U.S. is all talk about war in Ukraine. Now, President Trump promised that he could end the war within days of his presidency, but now we're months later and nothing's happened. Not only that, he's escalating war with Russia, and Russia is making sure that they are ready to rumble. Just this week, they ran tests of their nuclear arsenal after the U.S. canceled a peace summit. Now, the European Union announced a 19th package of sanctions, and the United States said, we'll do that too, even though they had pulled back on sanctions after the Alaska Peace Summit. Now they're ramping up sanctions. They're saying these sanctions are on Russian oil due to Russia's lack of serious commitment to a peace process. That's interesting because we're going to keep spending money, sending money in war and war weapons into Ukraine, but it's Russia that lacks a serious commitment. Now, interestingly, the sanctions focus on Russian oil companies, which sounds super tough, but the U.S. doesn't buy any Russian oil. So it's mostly symbolic. What do we make of this? Well, joining us to discuss is Scott Horton, who literally wrote the book about U.S. complicity in the war in Ukraine. He will help us make sense of this. So, Scott, have you been dragged along by any of this peace talks? It's happening, it's not. Were you optimistic about Alaska? Now we're back here again. What do you think this charade is about?
Well, I am, I guess, hopefully pessimistic. Is that a thing? I'm sorry. I really am repeating myself from everybody else's show and whatever. I don't know really what else to say about this other than it's just a tragedy that Donald Trump was inaugurated to begin his second term when he was. I think he really was sincere about wanting to end the war. He didn't really understand how he was going to. He was just betting that he'd be able to through force of his personality and hopefully through carrots of promises of normalized relations that just will figure it out. The problem is he can't figure it out because the situation on the ground is essentially where the Russians are winning slowly and they have a lot of territory left to take compared to what they've claimed they own. And they're fighting a war of attrition, which means they're not focusing on taking land as much as just trying to grind their enemy down. The Ukrainians say that they're doing the same thing, that that's their strategy as well. And so they're just trying to break the other's army. And then once they do, then they can have their way and go where they want. And as is obvious and has been obvious since before this war, time is on the Russian side. They got more men, they got more weapons, and they are right there adjacent, and we're not. And that's the difference. And they're going to win, but they still have fully 1/4, virtually, I don't know, right around 1/4 of Donetsk is outside of their control. And then somewhere between a third and a quarter of Zaporozhye and Kherson also remain outside their control, while they do control virtually all of Luhansk. But these are the 4 provinces that they've claimed. And to even compromise on Zaporozhye and Kherson, I think they should. And I think even that they will have attained much of their goals if they would settle, even as Donald Trump wishes they would do. Freeze the line where it is right now. Who cares if they have to leave 1/4 of Donetsk out? And who cares even if they only get what they have in Zaporozhye, and I mean from the Russian point of view here, even if they have to settle for what they've got in Zaporozhye and Kherson, because that is the so-called land bridge from the Donbass to Crimea. And they already have guaranteed the source of the fresh water supplies from the Dnieper River through that channel to Crimea, and the entire control of the Azov coast, Melitopol and Mariupol. And so, you know, Trump wants them to call timeout. And I think it's reasonable for them. That would be a reasonable compromise, I think. What the hell? They've already taken a lot, and they have paid a hell of a price, and so have the Ukrainians. And I agree with Trump, as he puts it, the killing has got to stop. It's too dangerous to have this war going on Russia's territory, or, you know, right on their border like this. And yet the Russians, they're in for a penny, in for a pound. And it was after the Ukrainians escalated in September of 22. Remember, they had that brilliant feint in Luhansk and Kharkiv, and then down in Kherson, where they actually made real great progress and kicked the Russians all the way out of Kharkiv Oblast and out of a third of Kherson, kicked them back across the river in Kherson. And as revenge for that, essentially, Putin got angry and said, oh, yeah, well, I hereby annex Zaporozhye and Kherson in their entireties. So now for him to fall short of that when he doesn't have to, only what, as a favor to Trump, that's a difficult ask. The incentives don't line up. Look at Trump's carrots and sticks. Trump can add more sanctions, which he's doing today, but that's completely marginal, and we all know that. Why? Because Biden already tried that and did the nuclear sanctions as best he possibly could, crippling sanctions, Iran-level sanctions as best as they could. All it did was move them toward Asia, but it didn't destroy their industry or destroy their economy at all. And then he can also pour in more missiles, but Biden already tried that too. As the Ukrainian military themselves have said, they don't really have the manpower to field more weapons than we're giving them anyway. A lot of American weapons, like our frontline battle tanks, have already been proven to be completely obsolete compared to tiny little drones. So, $29.99. So the Russians have every reason, essentially, to keep going. Oh, and I was going to say, pardon me, and Trump can also offer them carrots, right? He can offer them normalization. And there's a lot that America Russia can work on. And I don't mean from my libertarian point of view. I just mean all other things being equal. America and Russia can work together on everything from space programs to anti-drug to anti-terrorism to developing resources together, whatever. And so they could do that. And hey, how about getting back into some nuclear treaties like the INF Treaty and the Open Skies Treaty? That's not a nuclear treaty, but still a good one. And extending New START officially, maybe even getting rid of the sunset on it, making New START permanent and adding new and better nuclear treaties. Bring Putin to Washington, take him out to the ball game, or whatever you got to do to try to mend these fences and get things back, on some kind of better keel. But think about what I'm saying, right? That's impossible. The ask there for Trump to go that far. So after Russia did invade Ukraine, after all, he's going to give them everything just to get them to call timeout, right? And stop where they are now. In a frozen conflict that's bound to probably start up pretty soon anyway. It's impossible that could happen in terms of Washington, D.C. politics here. So everybody is just stuck between a rock and I'm sorry, I left out. The Ukrainians don't want to turn around and walk away from land that they stand on. They still stand on a quarter of Donetsk. They still stand on a third of Zaporozhye and Kherson, which includes major cities. They don't want to turn around and walk away just because Trump asks them to in order to get.
Well, that's a great point, Scott. That part of it. I mean, Natalie and I were just looking at each other off camera here about this because that piece of it, right? One of the whole motivations for this special military operation is that there's been a genocide against the people of the Donbass and Donetsk and Luhansk and Zaporozhye.
And the people there,
those ethnic Russians,
for the special military operation.
So,
they've been petitioning to Russia.
So are they going to just allow Ukraine to be their daddy again after they were bombing civilians in parks and carrying out attacks on schools? Why would anybody who lives in those areas who are, ethnic Russian specifically want to be a part of Ukraine at this point?
Well, that's a good question. I have to say, I don't know for sure the answer to that. I know that in the past, there were a hell of a lot of ethnic Russians and Russian speakers and culturally Russian people in Ukraine who had no interest in being ruled by the Russian Federation at all. And who very much would prefer to have been Ukrainians, just saying, I mean, it's a bunch of Hispanics in Texas don't necessarily want to succeed and join Mexico, I meant to say, and rejoin Mexico. You know what I mean? So
Right.
Sometimes people oversimplify that. Now there were, if you go back to 2014, hundreds of thousands of people did vote in solid majorities to declare sovereignty, which is not exactly independence and secession, but a form of independence from Kiev. So there was, clearly a lot of pro-Russian and anti, post-coup junta in Kiev sentiment there at that time. And certainly there were many people who welcomed the Russians' protection when they finally did come in there. I don't know how well that translates, and I suspect it translates less and less the further west you go. So, I know that in Odessa, for example, you have a lot of people who are culturally Russian, speak Russian, don't speak Ukrainian at all, but consider themselves Ukrainian and do not consider themselves to be, or that they ought to be citizens of Russia and would prefer to see the Russians take over that territory. Not that Kiev has been bombing Odessa, which is a distinction you made there when you were talking about Zaporozhye. But people get caught in crossfires a lot, and they forgive and forget when they have to, when they're just civilians living under one regime or another anyway. So I'm not sure how that would shake out. But
right. I guess that's what turns my stomach is thinking about like foreign leaders making choices for them based on something we don't understand.
We want to ask you, Scott, about this, which is just a short time ago. You just mentioned the new sanctions. The Russian President Dmitry Medvedev says that this is war, that President Trump just declared war on Russia. He said this about 6 hours ago. These decisions are an act of war against Russia by carrying out these sanctions. This sounds like taking Putin to a ball game is not going to happen. This is a major escalation, according to the Russian side.
Well, listen, can you tell me more about these sanctions, which makes them so dang wonderful compared to the ones that Biden already tried and desperately to inflict on them? Why is this a declaration of war compared to every other goddamn escalation before today?
Right.
Yeah, especially when the U.S. doesn't buy Russian oil.
Propaganda.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, they love their. Yeah.
Honestly, I was looking at these new sanctions like it's just a publicity stunt. What is like flicking them in the air? That doesn't mean anything. You put more sanctions on their oil, they sell it to somebody else. Who cares? We've been at this for 3 years already. What are we talking about? I'm honestly.
Yeah, they sell it to China and India, not to us. So that's not for us.
We'll just buy their uranium. We'll continue to do that. Which way?
Yeah. No, I'm sorry. I have to tell you, I don't know, and I wish I knew who to ask about why it is that Lavrov would use such severe language over this particular set of sanctions today compared to where we were 3 weeks ago or a year ago or any other thing, man. I really don't.
I mean, mostly they've not even talked about the sanctions before. They've never really said peep about it. And now suddenly Medvedev comes out and says this is an act of war against Russia.
Well, wait, was it Lavrov or Medvedev or both?
Medvedev, yeah.
It was Medvedev.
Okay, well, you know what? He says a lot of things. That's a lot different than if it was Lavrov. Medvedev is oftentimes, like angry Obama, that Key and Peele thing, where he gets out there and runs riot. If it was Lavrov saying that, I'm sorry, I take that way more seriously. So, okay. I don't like it, though. And it's just crazy to think that, somehow there's 8.5 billion people on this planet or whatever, and we just have no mechanism to grind this thing to a halt right now. Isn't this the highest priority of all of humanity, that we don't let there be a hot war on Russia's border right there 300 miles from Moscow when this thing could turn into an H-bomb exchange that we wouldn't even exist to regret? I mean, it's just, it's just nuts that this is able to still go on. I almost can't. I remember in early 24 or maybe late 23, they had an article in Politico. I bet it was late 23. They had an article in Politico that said, well, the Democrats say they just got to make sure and keep the war going through the election so it doesn't cost Biden that he lost a war. And I remember thinking, what? You guys plan on keeping this thing going through next fall? And it's like, yeah, no. And now that was a year ago, a year and a half ago.
Yeah.
And we're still here. And it's just, but again, honestly, I really don't know. Okay, here's the thing. In my mind, what it would take for Trump to end the war is he would have to tell Kiev, sorry, you're screwed. That's it. I really, really mean it this time. I'm cutting off all support for you, all advice, all intelligence, all coordination, all weapons, all everything. I demand that you give in, sign something. Here's the parameters I think that will be able to be acceptable. See you in Minsk or wherever for Minsk 3 or whatever the next deal is. And he would have to just twist that arm and force them now and to give up.
Yeah.
And you see how horrible that is politically speaking to do. I was, thinking of this, like in comparison to calling off Netanyahu, who is, shooting fish in a barrel, crushing these poor helpless Palestinians down there. This is not that. This is more like if we'd been backing the poor helpless Palestinians and now we're leaving them high and dry to finish being crushed, right? And so we're on the opposite side of the thing in terms of who's the underdog and who's the thing. And especially when it was, yes, the previous administration, but still the United States of America that did so much to get Ukraine into this mess. Now, the only way really to bring the war to an end is to betray our friends, to finally stab them all the way in the back and leave them high and dry. And hopefully not to be slaughtered, but to compromise and negotiate and walk away. But it's a hell of a thing. And this is the famous Kissinger quote about it: to be America's enemy is dangerous. To be our friend is fatal. And he was talking about situations like this where we promise a weak partner that we'll help them fight their stronger overlord enemy, but then we don't mean it and we're not coming for you. Did it to the Kurds over and over again, to the Hmong tribesmen in Vietnam. And then this is obviously to the Hazaras, Uzbeks, and Tajiks in Afghanistan. And now we're doing it to the Ukrainians. They're like, oh, yeah, no, we got your back.
Taiwan.
We don't have their back.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
Well said, until they become our enemies again, which is how we use them, like Al-Qaeda, of course. Scott Horton, the author of the book, Provoked. Great to have you here on the show. Check out the incredible book. Check out all of his body of work. Like I said, a walking encyclopedia of this stuff. Thank you, Scott. Great to see you.
Thank you both so much. Appreciate it.